Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends and neighbors. My name is Deval Patrick, and I am delighted to welcome all of you to Session 5 of the 2003 Words, Ideas, and Thinkers Festival. You're in the right place at the right time, because we are about to experience a conversation between two people who understand the power of words, André Bernard and Rita Dove. Before yes, go ahead, let's do it. Before I introduce them, I want to acknowledge all of and thank all of our sponsors. There's a list that was supposed to appear on the screen there, but it's in the last few pages of your program. Look for those you know and thank them personally. They are very, very important to making these kinds of extraordinary occasions possible. Now back to the power of words. Several years ago, when I was first running for governor, I made a commitment that we would keep our campaign positive, that we would be forward-looking, that we could have differences of opinion with contestants in the race, but we weren't going to make it personal or nasty. It sounds kind of quaint and naive, doesn't it? You can tell I was new to politics, and as we'd started to get real traction, things did get nasty. I was accused of all manner of evil and called everything but a child of God. I tried to run a positive campaign, as I said, but in that final debate, the moderator asked us to say something nice about our opponent. And I commented on having met my competitor's mother at several campaign events. And she had asked sharp and insightful and interesting questions. She was warm and funny. And I said, anyone who is of a mother like that can't be all bad. When my competitor was asked the same question, her response with a curl of her lip was, well, he can give a nice speech, but it's just words. Just words. I reflected on that. We hold these truths to be self-evident, just words. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. Just words. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Just words. I have a dream. Just words. My point was not and is not that my words were even close to those of Jefferson or Roosevelt or Kennedy or Dr. King. My point was and is that the right words, spoken from the heart and with conviction, are a call to action. No words are more true of that and in that way than poetry. And no poet is more true to that than this poet. Rita Dove is a poet, also a novelist, an essayist, a playwright, a songwriter, as well as an editor. She's been honored for her work with a Pulitzer Prize, the National Humanities Medal, the National Medal of Arts, the Bobbitt Prize, the Ruth Lilly Prize, the Wallace Stevens Prize, and 29 honorary degrees. She's also the former Poet Laureate of the United States. André Bernard is the Vice President of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. He's formerly Vice President and publisher of Harcourt Brace. He is himself the author of 5 books and numerous articles as a commentator on literary life. Please silence your phones and warmly welcome André Bernard and Rita Dove.
Deval, thank you very much. Can you all hear me? To those accolades, Rita, I would also add that in 6 weeks you're going to, I'm sorry?
Got an echo.
In 6 weeks you're going to get the medal from the National Book Foundation, recognizing your lifetime contribution to literature. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So I just want to say what an honor it is to share the stage with one of America's greatest living poets. Welcome back to the Berkshires.
Thank you. Thank you, André. This is a great space to be in. I can feel the energy. It's a safe space. It's a wonderful space. And it's great to be back in a different capacity this time, but to be back. When I was talking with André about how we wanted to do this, and I said, well, one of the advantages of poetry is that we can read some, and you had suggested that I read, and I said, let's intersperse it in our conversation. And because I do believe that poetry ambushes you or accompanies you in unexpected moments. It's always there. So we wanted to intersperse it. We'll see how it runs, but I'll start out with a few poems as a way of introducing myself to you, my lineage, which is the lineage of the United States in a way. And I'll start with a poem that is called Family Reunion. Family Reunion. How is that? Is that okay? I could hear the echo and I was worried too. It's called Family Reunion. In my family, the extended family, we gathered on the picnic holidays. Those were 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day. We're out of the picnic holidays now until the spring. It was a time when anybody from the family could come, from the great-great-grands all the way up. And I'm a Midwesterner, you can tell from my voice. Still, so that means that we were really at the crossroads of so many different kinds of immigrations in these United States. Family reunion. 30 seconds into the barbecue, my Cleveland cousins have everyone speaking Southern. Broadened vowels and dropped consonants, whoops and caws. It's more osmosis than magic, a sliding thrall back to a time when working the tire factories meant entire neighborhoods coming up from Georgia or Tennessee, accents helplessly intact, while their children, inflections flattened to match the field they thought they were playing on, knew without asking when it was safe to roll out a drawl. Just as it's understood, potluck means resurrecting the food we've abandoned along the way for the sake of sleeker thighs. I look over the yard to the porch with its battalion of aunts, the wavering ranks of uncles at the grill. Everywhere else, hordes of progeny are swirling and my cousins yakking on as if they were waist deep in quicksand, but like the books recommend, aren't moving until someone hauls them free. Who are all these children? Who had them and with whom? Through the general coffee tones, the shame genetics cut a creamy swath. Cherokee's burnt umber transposed onto generous lips. A glance flares gray above the crushed nose we label anonymous African. It's all here, the beautiful geometry of Mendel's peas and their grim logic. And though we remain clearly divided on the merits of okra, there's still time to demolish the cheese grits and tear into slow-cooked ribs so tender we agree they're worth the extra pound or two our menfolk swear will always bring them home. Pity the poor soul who lives a life without butter. Those pinched knees and tennis shoulders and hatchety smiles. Thank you. You don't have to applaud in between.
Sure we do. You're such a beautiful reader of your work.
Well, I grew up in a larger family where the matriarchs particularly were the storytellers. And when they told a story, they would tell them over and over again, but every time there would be gesture, there would be intonation, and they would change it just with a word. So I grew up hearing those sounds and loving the way my Aunt Ruby, for instance, would just say, "Oh, honey, she done something." And it's the pause, it's all of that, it's music. So, I have to honor them. They would be up here criticizing me right now.
Well, as you know, being a great reader of poetry isn't automatic for a poet.
No.
So it's wonderful to hear you.
Well, I think one of the reasons why, first of all, being being good in something and then being good in something else is never a given. But I think for poets, particularly for many poets, and it was the same for me, it's difficult to read the poems because they were conceived in such privacy, which isn't to say that they weren't written for a voice out there wanting to connect, but that moment is so deeply private that to get out on a stage and to read aloud is a totally different enterprise. And I was very shy. I still am very shy, but my Aunt Ruby would say, just get over it. Get over it and go on. But I began to understand from the musicians that I knew and also from the actors that I knew that it wasn't about me when I got out on that stage. And that I could be shy, I could be nervous, all that kind of stuff, but nobody wanted to see that. What they wanted was me to they were there to hear it. So I try to remember that.
Well, that brings up a debate that the poetry world has. Some poets think you should stay cloistered, you should stay interior, you should not be part of the world, and then let your muse flow. And then other poets say, no, you need to be out in the world, you need to experience the joys and the tragedies, and then bring it all home. How do you balance that?
Well, I think it's to each their own. Some poets want to be private and want to work that interior, it's not even an interior voice, but in a sense that lyric or meditative tone that we all have. I mean, there are moments when all of us want to be just alone and want to be just private and are thinking things that we don't even know we're thinking. I mean, they have no words, is what I'm saying. And so there are poets who I say, please, you don't have to get out on stage. You don't have to read anything aloud. And then there are poets who want to get out. And I find that I go it depends. When I'm working, when I'm writing, I want to be alone, and I'm not a very kind company, let's put it that way. Luckily, I'm a night person. Luckily, my husband is a night person. And so that means that when I am working, when I am writing, everybody is asleep. I mean, I'm serious. I go to bed at 7 in the morning. I'm a night person. So that means that if I start at midnight, I can at least be pretty sure that there's not going to be that many people texting me. Sometimes they do, though.
Will you read another?
I'll read another poem. This is a poem about my mother. So we're going to go from that larger family to a slightly smaller one who, my mother, it was a photograph that I had come across after my mother had passed. She was a woman who never came downstairs in the morning without either rouge or lipstick on. She just said, you got to be ready to meet the day. By that, I think she also meant you have to be ready to meet whatever the world's going to throw at you. And it comes, I think, from a long line of a tradition among African Americans that you needed to be pressed and neat and clean and super presentable in order to be even tolerated. In this picture, she's with some girlfriends of hers. It's right after World War II, and it's right before she gets married. Girls on the Town, 1946. You love a red lip. The dimples are extra currency, though you take care to keep powder from caking those charmed valleys. Mascara? Check. Blush? Oh, yes. And a hat is never wrong, except evenings in the clubs. There, a deeper ruby and smoldering eye will do the trick with tiny embellishments, a ribbon or jewel, perhaps a flower, if one is feeling especially flirty or sad. Until Rosie fired up her rivets, flaunting was a male prerogative. Now, you and your girls have lacquered up and pinned on your tail feathers, fit to sally forth and trample each plopped heart quivering at the tips of your patent leather Mary Janes. This is the only power you hold on to, ripped from the dreams none of you believe are worth the telling. Instead of mumbling, why not decorate? Even in dim light, how you glister, slow-eyed, your smile in flames.
Is that the poem that was part of Project 19?
Yes, it was. It was a project for the 19th Amendment, they asked.
Right. Project 19 was an initiative of the New York Philharmonic and the Academy of American Poets, was it? To honor the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote. So the initiative was to bring forth women composers like Tanya Leon and give them their just platform.
That's right, yeah. And when the Academy asked, I think, 19 poets, in honor of the 19th, to contribute a poem, there was my mother standing there in that picture saying, well, you gonna do this thing or not? Luckily, my mother was, she was alive and got a chance to witness the publication and success of Thomas and Beulah, the book which won the Pulitzer Prize. And she was an integral part of that book because it was about her maternal, it's about my maternal grandparents, her parents. And I loved the discussion that happened right before this because I was nodding all the time as they were talking about where's the line between fiction and autobiography. And with those poems, which tells the story of my grandparents in a way, it also just deviates. And I don't know now sometimes which poems are true or not true. That kind of thing. But my mother I would call her. Those were the days when people actually had phones, rotary phones, and I call her and ask, and she knew I was writing the book, and we would just talk. And she says, "What do you want to know?" And I said, "I don't know. I just talk about your life." And sometimes I would ask her something, and she would reminisce, and she never asked to see a single poem. She trusted that I would do it right. I changed colors of scarves and names. I changed my grandmother's name. And all of those great matriarch storytellers just nodded and said, yeah, that's about right. Can
I give a little context to this for the audience? So your first book was published in 1980.
Yes.
And then you wrote another collection of poetry. On the basis of those two books, you got a Guggenheim Fellowship.
That's right.
And you're to write a third book, which was Thomas and Beulah, which won the Pulitzer. It was an explosion on the poetry front. It was just a huge, huge book. And it was your grandparents' story, parts of, some invented, some real. But this has sort of followed you as you've developed the theme of memory and family history, like the first poem you read, Family Reunion. You go back again and again to family and to memories of their history. It's like something you keep, although you've expanded so much in the past decades, and you address politics and all kinds of things, but you always come back to family history.
Yeah, I do. I think it's also because the family history is an oral one mostly, and a lot of it has been eradicated. I mean, the further history, the deeper history is gone. We don't know where we came from. So it was so important to preserve the stories and the memories, as they transpired, the ones we could. I think that's what was happening. Which is why everyone would sit there and listen to that story for the 15th time and add a little bit to it. It was also building up you could say it's sort of like building up the myth of one's own family, but it's a myth of this is how we came together, this is how we arrived at this point. And then in doing that, I think as a child, I remember thinking that memory has everything to do with some absolute inner truth, but very little to do with what really happened.
Well, you're a writer.
That's why I'm a writer. Yeah.
That's what you do.
Yeah. And then there's this other thing that was there within this family, I guess you could say these family stories, there was a world out there swirling around, which was impacting us. It impacts everybody, I think, as African Americans, you could sit there and say, well, they say that's important, but, what about our story? Or what about this that happened? From a very early age, I could see that things were not being reported on that were devastating. So that being in and out of history was really important.
Yeah, I've noticed that some critics who talk about your embrace of family also embrace the idea of you talking about the American family. It's not just your family from Akron, Ohio, your extended family, but you really see a population as your extended family, for better or for worse.
Right. Yeah, I do. It's funny. I grew up in Ohio, northeastern Ohio, Akron, Ohio, to be specific, which was the rubber capital of the world, which, countless jokes when we were kids. But it also, at that time, Akron was on this, what is now the Rust Belt. It was just on this kind of highway of American hope and progress. I grew up in the 50s. So there were these tires. They went off to Detroit. There was steel coming down from Cleveland. There was Detroit, and everybody had a car that had some piece of my world in it. There was a feeling that, so I also began to see that, well, Ohio is a very bizarre state. It's the northern part abuts Canada. You could go up to Niagara Falls, all that kind of stuff. If you go to Cincinnati, it's really the South. It's true, and it is the South. And then there's the Appalachians. It's a completely schizophrenic state. But it's also a state. It's also a piece. It's in like many families. It has the odd uncle out there, and it's got, the industrious one over there. And what do you do with the family? Do you really, how do you deal with everyone in your family? How do you come together and eat? Let's put it that way. Eat is a metaphor, but how do you come together and feast? And if this country could ever get it together to consider itself a family with all of those disparate parts, and so maybe we could get together and feast.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know
maybe
either.
the past.
Yeah. We don't want to go there yet.
No.
Okay?
Please.
But I'll go slightly there. Let me read a poem that deals with where I am now, which is Charlottesville, Virginia, talking about this country, which had the most egregious, of course, statue of Robert E. Lee in the town square that they couldn't get rid of for a long time and we all know some of the tragedies happened there. I would drive by this statue on my way to so many places, and every time it was a thorn in my side. This took place right before they came down. Pedestrian crossing, Charlottesville. A gaggle of girls giggle over the bricks leading off Court Square. We brake dutifully and wait, but there's at least 20 of these knob-kneed creatures, blonde and curly, still at an age that thinks impudence is cute. Look how they dart and dither, changing flanks as they lurch along, golden gobbets of infuriating foolishness or pure joy, depending on one's disposition. At the moment, mine is sour. This is taking far too long. Don't they have minders? Just behind my shoulder in the city park, the Southern General still stands, stonewalling us all. When I was their age, I judged Goldilocks nothing more than a pint-sized criminal who flounced into others' lives, then assumed their clemency. Unfair, I know, my aggression. To lump them into a gaggle, silly geese, when all they're guilty of is being young. So far.
Oh,
I was not in a good mood.
Rita, those last two words, I mean, killing, really.
Wow.
And it's tragic that Charlottesville has now come to symbolize something else. You've been there for a long time.
I've been there for what, 30 odd years. Yeah.
And what kind of change have you seen? What's it like for you to live there?
I wouldn't have lived there this long if I didn't love the place, with all of its warts and its beauties. I came to Charlottesville to teach at the University of Virginia. I thought there were some of the English department there and other departments were just phenomenal and interesting and vital and questioning and pushing. And it was a bubble. You know, the town was a bubble in the Old Dominion, I guess you could say. And Thomas Jefferson, who built that university, is like your class A, I keep using that word lightly, but I don't mean to, that talk about a divided soul. And there his statue was in the middle of this university. And I felt that I'm sitting right here at the crossroads of all the things that sizzle under the surface of this country, with the Confederate capital just down the road at Richmond, and the Declaration of Independence and everything being composed, the spirit of it being right there. And I thought, this is where I need to be. I need to feel this underneath me and burning. So I would say that in Charlottesville, while now people have become more cognizant of the fact that the dangers, as all of us are, I think, that the danger is there. It was never really put away because we haven't addressed we haven't addressed our deepest shames yet as a country.
Well, this is what happens so often in your poems. On the surface, they're about something, a family reunion, an event of some kind, and then you lift the lid and you have the girls who are benevolent for now.
For now.
And there's a sort of a hint of what's to come.
Well, I'm sorry to be such a downer, but it's true. I mean, it's just, also, I also feel that I want to, those girls offer them a chance, they're some of them are gonna be okay.
Some will.
Yeah, some will.
Yeah.
I guess I was always taught or I guess I learned it. Wasn't taught. I just watched, and I learned that sometimes you can convince more if you whisper than if you shout. Sometimes I shout too, but the whisper the thing is to get someone to listen, and they're not going to listen if they are already convinced that you have nothing to say. So you just go around the backside and
Right.
get them that way.
Tennis shoulders, hatchet faces.
Hatchet faces.
Yeah.
Children understand this, I think, so well. They have to learn to negotiate a world of these adults who aren't explaining things to them at all, and they sit there, they can read a room. They sit there and know, okay, what can I get away with? They're always testing their limits, what can I get away with, that kind of thing. And so, and then we learn to follow proper protocols and are surprised when something, blows up in our faces. And so, like, for instance, my daughter, who is now, professor, it's kind of scary, but it's so wonderful. But when she was about 4 or 5, and she even says now, she says, I had a great childhood. I mean, I had fun. I had, and we're really good friends even now. But she had a period when she would walk through the house just saying, nobody loves me but the spring cricket. And we were like in despair. We like, well, what did we do wrong? Who is this spring cricket? Wouldn't tell us. But just, it was her way of trying to figure out how guilty we felt about whether we were doing a good job or not. She was perfectly satisfied, but why not get a little more? So she had a whole litany about the spring cricket. What the spring cricket, she and the spring cricket had done that day that was so much better, and so finally I said, I have to find out who the spring cricket is and why, and I began writing poems about the spring cricket. So nowadays she said, we reached an agreement that I would never read them within a 50-mile radius of her.
And where is she now?
Arizona.
You're safe. You're okay.
But she lifted the ban. She said, I could do this now. So it's okay. This is the first spring cricket poem that I wrote. And it was, I know, right as we've all talked about research and stuff like that, I know a lot about crickets, I'll tell you that. The spring cricket considers the question of negritude. I was playing my tunes all by myself. I didn't know anybody else who could play along. Sure, the tunes were sad, but sweet too, and wouldn't come until the day gave out. You know that way the sky has of dangling her last bright wisps? That's when the ache would bloom inside until I couldn't wait. I knelt down to scrape myself clean and didn't care who heard. Then came the shouts and whistles, the roundup into jars, a clamber of legs. Now there were others, tumbled, clouded. I didn't know their names. We were a musical lantern. Children slept to our rasping sighs. And if now and then one of us shook free and sang as he climbed to the brim, he would always fall again, which made them laugh and clap their hands. At least then we knew what pleased them and where the brink was.
Okay, this is that poem, and this sequence of 6 poems are a perfect, amazingly powerful example of what we were just talking about. Something on the surface, the cricket poems, it's the cricket playing, talking about Valentine's Day, talking about hip-hop, but in fact the subject is something much more serious. Would you be willing to read the next poem in the sequence?
The next poem in that sequence? Yes, oh, sure, I'll do that. What happened was that started out with research and thought about the ways the crickets are gathered in lanterns, and the crickets began to talk. They told me what it was about. The next poem is called "The Spring Cricket Repudiates His Parable of Negritude." Hell, we just climbed, reached the lip and fell back, slipped and started up again, climbed to be climbing, sang to be singing. It's just what we do. No one bothered to analyze our blues until everybody involved was strung out or dead. To solve everything that was happening while it was happening would have taken some serious opium. Seriously, all wisdom is afterthought, a sort of helpless relief. So don't go thinking none of this grief belongs to you. Even if you don't know how it feels to fall, you can get my drift. And I, who live it daily, have heard that perfect word enough to know just when to use it, as in, oh hell, hell no, no, this is hell.
You know, to me, of all of the poems in this book, this is the one that penetrates the deepest. It says where many of us are, and it's such a raw commentary. The cricket is telling us we're not paying attention, we don't see what is happening.
Yeah.
Amazing sequence.
Well, thank you. I mean, the crickets, I mean, I really owe it to our daughter because she chose a cricket, I think deliberately, as she was 4 or 5. She knew that everyone thought crickets were delightful except when they're in your house and you can't find them and they're making a little noise. So she knew that they were both an irritant or a pleasure depending on one's disposition. She kind of, she fed off of that. She was insistent that it was a cricket. There is no spring cricket. She made that part up. Yeah.
Jiminy Cricket.
There is Jiminy Cricket, but she didn't know Jiminy Cricket. And that's interesting. She didn't know. Jiminy was my generation. She really didn't know Jiminy. Though he was a performer and he was a. Yeah,
I think you told me that she didn't watch TV as a kid. And what does she do now?
Now she is a professor of film and media studies. Because what do you do? So she tells us all, yes, that's what happens. They find their way, sometimes, kids.
I want to ask you a little bit about getting started.
Okay.
You're getting started. So you were first published in 1980.
Yeah.
And what were the... Publishing is overwhelmingly white, and by the way, overwhelmingly female, and has been for a long time. But what were you looking at when you tried to get published? And what was it like? What kind of reception did your manuscript get? You were published by Carnegie Mellon, which has an incredible backlist in poetry,
Yes.
One of the great poetry publishers. How did you land there?
Oh. Well, when I started writing seriously and trying to publish, I think I was coming right at the tail end of the Black Arts Movement, okay? So what the Black Arts Movement did for me as a writer was to at least call attention to Black writers. I did not grow up in New York, and I didn't have I worried, I said, I grew up in the Midwest. I had a Midwestern existence. Will the publishing industry believe that there is a Black woman growing up in the Midwest? And then I remember I was still a graduate student at Iowa, going to the stacks in the library and seeing this book called The Bluest Eye, and not knowing who the person was because they had taken all the jacket covers off so you could look at pictures. And I used to wander the stacks. I would just go in there and just like pick a Dewey Decimal, sequence, and just go in there and pick a few books. But I saw this book and I just picked it up to read, and I read the first page and I thought, this person is from the Midwest. This person is, part of my family. I mean, I really felt it. And Toni Morrison gave me that permission and belief that there was a way to be heard, the kind of stories that I had, which were different than the Black arts movement, most of them, to be heard. Still, when I began writing and when I began publishing, there was always this feeling, sometimes it was like I wasn't Black enough. I don't know what that means. I know what it means, but it's just this feeling that the poems were, I should write more about being Black. And I'm thinking, I'm writing about being human, and I am Black, and I am a female. And sometimes one of those takes precedence, but I'm going to write about the whole human being. When I published Thomas and Beulah, and Carnegie Mellon was such a fantastic publisher they did my first 3 books, because Jerry Costanzo, who was the editor, was pretty much like saying, just go for it. I've got your back, but no matter what you do. And so when I started to write that book, I was terrified that it wasn't going to, that people would just destroy it and not like it. Because it was telling a story of 2 very ordinary people that nothing dramatic happens to. There are no drug busts. There are no, they're poor, but they're not impoverished. They're just trying to figure out if there's any of this American dream left for them. And that story wasn't around out there yet, and that voice, that kind of. So I worried, and I got my share of, critics who said that, well, this is, this isn't really authentic. This couldn't happen because all Black people were supposed to be of a certain ilk, and the feeling too that people just wanted me to be a certain kind of poet, and I didn't know what I wanted to be. I just wanted to be me. I wanted to write my poems and do them. I didn't want to be labeled. So it was difficult. It was difficult for everyone, though if you were a woman poet, if you were any kind of poet who wasn't writing in a certain style, which was a bit, I'm going to tread lightly here, removed. Let's say removed and above raw emotion. That was something that was frowned upon. There are always trends, but those were the kind of things I was navigating. And so I was absolutely stunned when that book got the Pulitzer, because I thought they were going to just grind it in the dirt. I really did. I really thought that, yeah. I've had my reviews where people have called, I still remember one review, it was called it was a group review, omnibus review of 8 women poets, written by a male, and the title of the review was All Ye Fair and Tender Ladies. You know where that one's going. That stuff happened.
You asking me to leave now?
No, you're fine. You're fine. That's why it's just, but I sat there thinking too, later as in my career, I kept thinking, look, when I first began writing poetry, the only places where you could get an MFA in poetry, which to my mind is really just permission to have 2 years to work out your stuff, right, were Columbia and Iowa. It was really, they were the ones. And then, but I kept thinking, if you're going to be graduating all these people and they're all going to be trying to be poets, even if you say only 10% of them are going to end up publishing a book, then they're going to start writing programs. And before long, you can't keep the barbarians from the gates of the castle, because they're just, all of these diverse people, the people that I met who were trying to write, and were the only one of their kind, so to speak, in our class, like Joy Harjo and Sandra Cisneros, who were also in my class. I said, they're going to be teaching people, and you cannot keep this ivory tower ivory. And who wants it ivory anyway? I'm just kind of thrilled at the kind of things that are happening today.
Well, picking up on that and on your mentioning the Black Arts Movement, I ran across something that Ishmael Reed said. I'd like to read it to you because I think it's interesting. It ties into this. He was a poet who was not a fan of the Black Arts Movement, but in its defense, he said, the Black Arts Movement made multicultural movement possible. You don't have to assimilate. You could do your own thing, get in your own background, your own history, your own traditions, and your own culture, thus opening the door to the kind of publishing that we see now.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's kind of wonderful. Yes.
So Sandra Cisneros and Joy Harjo could do their stuff.
I grew up reading Shakespeare and loving Shakespeare and identifying with not just Othello, but identifying with I never Romeo and Juliet there a little bit. Even as a teenager, I'm like, oh, get it together. I grew up also. My father was a chemist, but he loved biographies, so he would read biographies all the time. And there were books in the house, and they subscribed to the great books of the Western world. Now, we know the great books of the Western world, which were, 56 or so volumes the first, and it was supposed to be end all and be all of Western civilization, and it's so stunningly, white and male, that you just, but there was the Iliad, and there was the Odyssey, and I identified with those things. If I, as a little, 12-year-old black kid in Ohio, could feel and identify with Odysseus sometimes as he's trying to make his way back, or with Penelope, then why couldn't it be the reverse? Why couldn't all of those people who were in the mainstream identify with, my corner of the world? Yeah. That's what reading does, and that's what's so magical about it. And that's why the world expands every time we open up a book.
Well, that's what you did with the Penguin Anthology of 20th Century American Poetry, which I think is the best guide to 20th century American poetry in print there is. I was looking at it the other day and comparing the Library of America, which has a 2-volume set. You have brought some people into that anthology, especially in the latter pages. Elizabeth Alexander, Natasha Trethewey, Kevin Young. You put them in before those people flower, really. And you knew. I mean, they have flowered.
They have.
They are poetry now. And you found them. You managed to put them in.
I didn't find them. They already knew who they were. Yeah. Well, when I was doing the Penguin Anthology, I remember my editor had said that you're going to be the sole editor of this thing. And I thought, well, there's no way you can compete with the Norton. I mean, the Norton has like an army of researchers, and it's the way it's composed. I said, what are we missing in terms of an anthology? And I remembered the kind of anthologies that I read when I was a kid, the Louis Undermeyer Treasury of Best Loved Poems and things, and how I would kind of just dabble in it. I would dip and read, and I almost never read the bios, because when you're a kid, you don't care, but I thought, I'm not going to give a lot of back material. I want the poem itself to come out. And my main criteria was, I want this anthology to give an impression of what the 20th century was like poetically, seen through that lens, which means that sometimes someone who was, there was a poem that was incredibly seminal at that point in time, like 1920 or something. But we may not know it now because it's gotten kind of smushed or pushed around. And so that was my kind of guiding light, I guess. And yeah.
I mean, I have to admit that I love reading Merwin. I love reading Donald Hall, Galway Kinnell.
Mm-hmm.
But they're a certain generation and a certain kind of poetry. That's not this poetry.
Well, I mean, but I love them too, and I grew up reading Galway Kinnell and reading Donald Hall, and they helped. They were the seeds for the next generation. I wouldn't be here without them. I wouldn't be here without their sensibility. And but like every family, I guess you could say, like every family, what you do is you say, the young ones say, okay, thank you very much, or maybe they don't even say thank you, and then they go off and they do something else, and they think they're being original, and really what they're doing is, they're kind of bouncing off of what's happened before. So, yes, they were fantastic. And they were rebelling against the group before them, It's the way it is, yeah.
Well, you've written some poems about poetry.
Yes, I have written some poems about poetry. I remember when I was a student, one of the assignments was to write an Ars Poetica, and I thought, I don't know enough to write an Ars Poetica yet. And so I resisted it for many, many years. And in fact, I wrote an anti-Ars Poetica once, just because I thought, no, that's not going to work. But, and a lot of times I think I'm taking umbrage against the standard notion of what a poem should be, or what, because I think that everything can be a poem, and that there's nothing too small, ordinary, or boring that can't be made, that can't become a poem, because in your life there are those moments that are incredibly important and that you think nobody else cares about, but we all have them. We all have those moments. So let me see. Let me read a sonnet for a sonnet. It's a sonnet, but it's kind of our notion of what, that a sonnet has to always be about love. A sonnet for the sonnet. It's addressed to the sonnet. You have occupied the rose garlanded throne for so long. No one remembers a time when love wasn't a portable feast, metaphorical conceits sung to the gimpy tread of a heartbeat. That true rhyme equals contentment, a neatened song we've learned to yearn for? My dumpling, that is entirely your doing, a glittering fait accompli we've been duped into trying to make reality, complete with lute-plucked warbling under a moon-splashed lattice. Let's face it, love is messy or boring or hurts like hell and then is gone. Even when we're satisfied, beyond the garden gate, the rest waits. All those years you never thought to mention. No matter how the cake is sliced, some choice bits break off. It's nearly wide enough for two, this sugar-coated ledge. We clamber on for one more lick of the jagged edge.
Well, this is your thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
You can't read that and actually want to go back to Dickinson right away.
Oh, I don't know. See, but the thing is that I love sonnets. I love them. And I love all the ways that you can play off of them. And I think that that's what Shakespeare was doing too. He was just like in love with all the possibilities of pushing the sonnet at that time. So I'm just pushing it a little further, you know.
I think you're in love with poetic form. You've written poems as odes, as aubades, as sonnets.
Yes.
You play with all of them.
I do love form. I love it's not that I love the restriction of form, but I like when it fits together. But it should fit together in a way that no one notices that it fits together. It's the way in which a chord resolves in music, and you didn't even realize that there was that augmented seventh until it, does that thing. So that kind of thing. And I think that it also comes from having a mother who was a seamstress, in the way in which you fit together clothing and then you wear it. But at first it has to be laid out flat, and it has to be fit together. All of those things speak to me about form. So, yeah.
Well, you have a sequence of 8 odes.
Oh, yes. Yeah, this is, these odes came about. You can be sure that if I say it's an ode, it's probably an anti-ode. But they came about because during the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, of course, I canceled all of these engagements. We all did. And suddenly I was home again at my desk and with time to really think about some things that had been troubling me. And these odes, which are in a section called, 8 Angry Odes, were my way of giving myself permission to shout a little bit. Because I had been rankled by the fact that people kept saying, oh, you're so polite, which can be a slap if someone says that to you. I felt like saying, you don't know me, I'm not polite at all. So here's a poem. This is the introduction to the section. And in fact, the pedestrian crossing poem, the Charlottesville poem with the geese and the girls, that's an ode as well. I think it's in the odes. But this is called the Angry Odes, an introduction. The angry odes are not satisfied with wonder. Birds prattle, clouds curdle, then bust their guts. Mountains prefer their own splendid company. Neither do they melt when music swells, although they've been caught swaying unaware in a delicate self-embrace. The odes hate their names. To hell with urns and nightingales, immortality and socks, those artful self-immolations, pity parties fueled by gloom or a gruff, enforced gaiety. They snarl at affirmation, will laugh outright when asked for declarations in return. Do not try reason. The odes are fed up with misspelled signs accusing others of ignorance, the belligerent purveyors of programmed rectitude. Let them rage. Do your work. Reap the ashes. Perhaps they'll muster a flicker of pity. Recall a time when all they did was praise.
Nice.
I wish. Yeah, I wish we could be that way.
Ready? Ready?
Is it time?
It is time.
Okay.
All
Could
right.
I do one more poem?
Absolutely.
I will exit with this poem and then... No, I won't. I want to do this poem because I felt that it was, first of all, because it's part of a song cycle that was premiered here at Tanglewood just last year, which was kind of wonderful, but also because, as André said to me, we need a little bit of hope. And I thought I could do that. So this poem was part of a series called A Standing Witness, the last 60 years of American history, give or take. 11th testimony, this one, Obama. Send these to me. Surely there can be no more princes, Yet here we are, reinventing the magic year of love, though the music is scarred and there's always a war or two going on. At least the system seems to be working. You've voted, done the counting, and there he stands, America's miracle, fruit of bold dreams and labor. Ladies and gents, the unimaginable is open for business. Assemble your buoyant prophecies. Who wouldn't want to believe in legends again, oblivious to everything except astonishment? Well done. Felicitations. And now the story is yours. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Rita and André have agreed to take some questions, so if we can bring up the house lights, we will moderate. Down in front in the red sweater. Yes.
There's a trend now about cultural appropriation, that people are criticized, you cannot write unless you are Latino, Mexican, whatever. And I wonder, it always seemed to me, I couldn't write about a vampire unless I was a vampire. I don't know. How does that work? How do you feel about it? And where are we going in our cultural environment?
Okay.
Did everybody get the question? Maybe you might want to.
You want me to repeat it? I'll repeat
you?
it. Okay.
Great.
More or less. That the questions about cultural appropriation and where that gets us now in our environment, and the idea that can we really say that you cannot write about something unless you are Latino or you're Black or something like that. And this comes up often in my own writing classes, where students feel like they don't dare write from the point of view of the other sex. I do it all the time. I mean, people have done it since time immemorial, and I say, well, the fact that you're asking the question means that you're going to try to be as honest as possible and as true as possible. Basically, I think that cultural appropriation only happens when the person who is writing it is lazy or has a point they want to get across and are not really, really listening to their characters. Every time we read something that moves us deeply, there is some sort of cultural line that we have to cross. There's something in there that the writer themselves couldn't possibly have experienced in the flesh, but have researched it. Maybe it happened, in the 18th century, or to another gender, or to another class. But thank goodness that we have the capacity to imagine and to wonder, and that. So my feeling is that cultural appropriation it's a pendulum swing. You see, what happens is that and it will swing back again, and it probably will go too far the other way. But right now, the idea is to try to protect the stories that a particular group might have, for fear that someone else will tell them wrong. My feeling is that the best defense, or not even a defense, weapon against cultural appropriation is to write it yourself and do it right. Outright I was about to say a bad word. Outright the MF, yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's see, there's a hand here. Is this the shy side of the room? Okay, in the way back. So 1, 2, and your neighbor is 3. You have to remember your numbers, like the deli. Anybody else? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, go, sir.
When you're putting together a new collection, how do you know when you've collected enough new material to be worthy of a new collection? And then once you have those pieces, how do you think about sequencing or collecting? How do you take the raw material and make it a book?
Okay, the question is about when I'm putting together a new collection, how do I know when it's finished? How do I go about putting it together and knowing what if it's taken its shape. And every book has been different. I tend, unless I'm working under a certain umbrella in the book, like for instance, the book with my grandparents, Thomas and Beulah, where I knew there was an end to it, and that kind of thing. But unless I'm working on an umbrella, I actually don't think about writing a book. I'm writing poems. And each poem, I don't question if it's going to fit somewhere. No. The poems are going to tell me where they belong. And so my method of putting them together is very strange. And maybe it's not so strange. I don't know. I mean, I put them on the floor. Some people put them on the wall. We had this long conversation, a friend of mine, she goes, oh, I'm a wall person, I hang them up. And I'm like, no, they're too high. They look down on me and they glower. I want them on the ground. And then I walk among them and I sit down with them sometimes. And I said, who wants to be with whom? Again, it's families, I think. But it's a way of figuring out how they're going to talk to each other. Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's very strange.
Who's in the way back? Yeah.
Hi. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. This is a question about the sonnet, and she said she teaches the sonnet, but somehow sonnets have evolved so they almost sound like free verse. And how do they break down? Well, I think that I tend to be actually a real conservative person when it comes to sonnets. I really feel that they have to have some sensibility of the sonnet beyond the fact that there are 14 lines. But if you consider the fact that our language has changed from iambic pentameter, just the way we speak has changed because of all the contractions that we have, because of the way in which the world has, the way in which our world asks for sound bites. So things have to be short and snappy. So this is the music that we are accustomed to every day. And if you're going to, a lot of contemporary sonnets are trying to capture that kind of music, which means iambic pentameter is no longer the basis for it. It's a different kind of rhythm. I tend to try to play off of iambic pentameter in the same way that you could have a very strict sense of a ballad. I mean, I'm talking music now, done, 1, 2, 3, 4, the regular 4/4 time. And the difference between that and jazz, right? That kind of syncopation, which pays attention to the standard, 4/4 beat, but plays with it and syncopates it. So that's what I try to do. In that one sonnet that I read, I think it's ABBA mostly, in terms of the rhyme. But the line doesn't, most of the lines do not end, the rhyme does not end the thought, okay? It may end the line, but it doesn't end the thought. Because that's how we think nowadays, too. We're not, we don't think in measured ways, in jerks and stuff. So, because it isn't. It's not at all free. I mean, it's not at all free. It may just sound like it's not striving for the rhyme. And in fact, whenever I'm working on form, and this is what I love about form, I want the form to find me. So I'm not searching for the rhyme, but the rhyme will find its way into the poem. At the same time, I won't call it a sonnet unless it rhymes. You just have to find the rhymes. They're there.
Your neighbor was number 3 back here. Yes.
On the book banning? Yeah, the question is about what my take is on the book banning, and it is devastating, and I never thought that I would be alive to see something like this happening in this country. It's really not about the banning of the books. It's a banning of a culture and a banning of a way of thinking. How do you read something and come to terms with the world that it depicts? And I find that it's just reprehensible, and it's frightening. It's terribly frightening. And we need to fight back as much as we can in every way that we can. It's one thing to say, it's true that a lot of kids, if you ban something, they're going to read it because they want it. They say, ooh, that's something I shouldn't read. But what's missing out of that equation is the fact that if they're actually reading the book in school, or they can read it and ask someone if they don't understand something, or if something bothers them and why it bothers them, a way of being able to think through something, to think it through and to be able to come out the other side a little bit wiser and wholer. That's what education does. If you can stop people from being able to think things through. It's not about accumulating facts, but it's also being able to deal with these complex emotions. And the books that are being banned, because they make someone feel uncomfortable or whatever, yeah, okay, don't get me started. Don't get me started. It's just that the books that are being banned are, very often you say, well, why that one? Why that one? Not that any should be banned. But sometimes it has something to do with just the fact not wanting to be able to talk about something. You just don't even want to think of that exists. Well, this is a world we're stepping into. Let's figure it out together. We do have more in common than we have differences, and differences are nothing to be afraid of. Why would we want to make ourselves so lonely? Right?
Number 4.
Hi.
What are your thoughts about the way that we're becoming more atomized and alienated from each other as people? And you talk about being from Akron and about having a little piece of like what your town creates in every car that you see, and it's been outsourced because of the way that our capitalist system is. It's been outsourced, and we've been alienated from each other in many ways. What are your thoughts on that?
The question, or what are my thoughts on the fact that we're becoming increasingly alienated and torn apart, and I think that I, like you, are wrestling with this every day, with these kind of thoughts. And one of the things that, only thing that I can think of, and the thing that actually carries me through sometimes, is something that Bertolt Brecht actually said, in one of his poems, and he said, oh, in the bad times, you write about the bad times. You don't give up. And to do the things that you do well and love to do with as much integrity, honesty, and hard work as you can, even in the midst of all of this, is the way to make humanity continue. When you do these things, not only do you have that, I guess you could say it's a kind of a selfish moment of bliss when you're working, and it's something that you love to do, but you'll discover that there are other people who do it, and you're not alone. You're just not alone. The bluster that's coming from politicians and from a lot of people, that kind of shouting makes it seem like you're alone, because you're sort of like, no, I don't do that. I'm not going to scream and yell, but you are not alone. Reading has always floated me. Music has always floated me, because if someone can write that, then, and I hear something and say, well, there's still a soul out there that understands me, right? But the one thing, yeah.
That's a great, great place to leave it. Thank you so much. Rita Dove, André Bernard, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Duval, Patrick for introducing, and to André Bernard for the interview, and Rita, Dove, oh my gosh, thank you for sharing your beautiful poetry and your wisdom. This is really, really a special session. Thank you. Beautiful. So I want to just remind everybody that Rita will be signing books outside. André, are you also signing, or just Rita? Just Rita. Oh, just Rita. Okay. So right outside, come back tomorrow morning, 10:30. We have Roxanna Robinson is here with us, talking to Michael Cunningham. Now note, Michael has COVID, so he will not be here in person, but he will be videoing in. So please do come. It's going to be an amazing session. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.